Hi, welcome to another episode of Simply Connected, a podcast where we unpack the complexities of broadband connectivity. In each episode, we tackle a single topic and untangle it with the help from some of the industry's most influential figures. Today, I'm joined by not one, but two fantastic guests, and we're going to be exploring some of the more operational benefits of applications and services on broadband devices. So, to kick things off, I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. So, Paul, start with you.
Great. Well, thank you, John. Appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with both of you fine gentlemen. Paul Keator, I've been working on broadband longer than I would like to admit. So very versed in, network architectures and home services, the application layers that come around it, and kind of the ecosystem end to end, right? How to make things work, how to make things work from a scale perspective, and then very active in, call it broadband standards as well, and have definitely, participated in the Purple Foundation, the Broadband Forum. Currently the chair of the HomeGrid Forum. So, so still out there doing a lot of broadband. It's a passion of mine I like to do. It's actually fun at the end of the day, believe it or not. And you really do have the ability to do a lot of great creative things. So looking forward to our conversation.
Exactly.
Over to you, Jason.
I am Jason Walls from QA Cafe. I'm the director of technical marketing here, but I do a lot of different things. QA Cafe, we make the industry standard CD router test platform for broadband gateways, Wi-Fi devices, and other customer premises equipment. That is pretty much the de facto standard for all that kinds of testing. But as a result of all that, I'm deeply involved in the standards and standards creation and open source worlds, which is also very fun, like Paul said. But I like how my teenager says it. She says that when she was younger and she first encountered what a standards meeting was like, she's like, my dad goes to bars to make rules for the internet.
What a great way to describe it. I like it. So we'll kick off. You touched on a good point there, Jason, actually. I think because open source will be something that we cover quite a bit on today, I imagine, as part of what underpins a lot of the good work that's been done in this industry. I couldn't get into the episode without mentioning your podcast, of course. And I think actually the brain children of that are in the room, right? The founding fathers almost of your podcast in the room.
It was, Paul was in the room where it happened. It was,
right.
That's the Epic Melon podcast. And it started off, the name I had in mind for a while. But it started off with Paul and I and Joao in a bar at the Purple Summit. And they were telling me all these stories, these crazy stories about their field tech days and like the strange people and problems they encountered. And we were like, we need to talk about this.
Yeah. And your daughter's already 1 for 1 on the podcast, Jason. So
Yep.
Good. I'll make a small plug for that because I think we had a chat a few weeks ago and that episode's now live. So I will put a link to that with this episode as well because I really enjoyed that conversation. So let's get into it then. So where do we start with this? This kind of this beast of operators are doing a whole lot of things. They want to provide connectivity to their users, but they want to do it in a way that allows them to do things like update software quickly, get changes out there quickly to their end users, do that in a way that doesn't require a massive amount of engineering effort. We'll certainly touch on open source. Is that the big underlying thing that we start with here, or is another piece of the puzzle?
And really, when you're looking at all this from an operator's perspective, they're looking for, time to market improvements, right? Operational efficiencies, right? Standardized approaches to make you be able to go to market quicker, like I was saying. So when the open source comes in, you're really looking at those types of areas. How do I make it to market quicker? How do I make it more efficient for my business and our operational partners? And even like you look at test scenarios, how do I make it when I'm going through a test cycle I'm not looking at everything for the first time over and over again. And that's when you get in kind of the open source and you start creating standard on the software side of things, standard software that you can port across different chipsets and use. So that way, call it functions like, DHCP, NTP, DNS, you know them because you've seen them over and over again. So you're not getting it like it's been in the past. You get a new device and you have to look at every function like you've never looked at it before, right? So it's going to help from an efficiencies perspective, time to market, and those types of things. Going down the open source path, because that's, as an operator, that's really what your goal is and what you're trying to do, right?
And it's been kind of an evolution. I always say that like technology has this weird sort of turning point moment, right, where all of the pieces are in place and also the need and the desire. And it's one of the things that we had seen even before. I mean, obviously the open source community when it comes to the design of home gateways and Wi-Fi devices has been going on for a while, right? So like RDK, Purple, OpenWRT, right, has been around for a long time. And the standards have been around even longer than that. uh, there's just been this kind of evolution over time, and I think it's been out of necessity. And the way that I ended up experiencing it at QA Cafe was the kinds of people who were buying CD router shifted like by a lot, right? Because it used to be almost exclusively the vendors, right? Right. All the way down to the retail level. And then over the last, I want to say, maybe 5 to 7 years, maybe even sooner, you saw this huge shift towards operators having their own design departments, right? Their own, like they're the ones who are taking control of these pieces, right? The hardware and the middleware and then eventually the applications that we'll talk about. But when they realized that it was in their best interest to take a more active role in this process and have it be that it is their product that they're producing for the broadband service that they're offering, is when you started to see this shift. And when that started, they were still doing it, with with a couple particular vendors, and they were doing it with monolithic firmware. And eventually they were like, we don't want to do that anymore either. So that's when the need started to be expressed that was then met by all this open source and standardization community.
Right. And then the great thing you're seeing, especially in the Purple Foundation, is you have all the pieces of the pie participating, right? All the way from the SOC vendors, the SOC, I should say SOC, the SOC vendors, you got the software developers, you got the service providers, you got the OEMs, you got the application providers. So everyone's participating in that ecosystem to help the service, because it's all about service providers at the end of the day, to help those service providers go where they want to. And really the basics of that is own the customer experience and make it better at every turn and have the flexibility to do so without a whole bunch of heavy lifting when you want to implement something. So
It's a good point, actually, and I think you're right. I was probably starting a little bit later in the day there, where the open source comes after you've got the standards and the thing that just
Well,
sets the
we can talk
really.
about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, good point. But yeah, I guess in theory, at least, the standards set the standards for of which then open source makes sense on top of that, because you've got a set of guidelines that you can work to, and that they will always be the same, and therefore when you can build experiences on top of that in terms of middleware that align to those standards. So to your point, Paul, I guess then you don't then reinvent the wheel each time you do your next middleware. You're still aligned to the same standard. You're not redoing that from scratch.
right. I mean, even in the past, coming out with a new piece of CPE, you're completely reinventing the wheel over and over again, because you're taking a piece of CPE, their software, you have your requirements that they implemented, but it was still different software at the end of the day. And like I said, use something like DHCP. We would constantly get it and it was acting different, right? And you would think, oh, it's DHCP, it works just fine, don't worry about it. But that was never the case. So every time we looked at it, we had to look at it like we've never seen it before in these new implementations. And that's where the standardization, coming up with your own, call it, software platform, something like Purple that you can put on top of your hardware, make it portable across different chipsets, which is another thing we all learned during, the times of our past, it became very possible to get chipsets and everything. You need to be able to have that, call it disaster recovery model, to be able to port that firmware across different chipsets pretty easily to keep the business going forward, and still keep that predictable customer experience that your customers expect.
And is that? It sounds like that's improved over time because of better alignment to those standards and more open source or more providers are aligning themselves to those standards because it's a sensible thing to do. Is there still, in your view, a lot of work to do there, or are we, where are we? If you were to take 0 to 10 on the progress, and 10 is we've achieved everything we wanted to achieve, and everything just works, and there's no improvements to be made. Where do you think we are on that journey? If you could plot us on that path as an ecosystem, by the way, not as an individual.
I mean, when you look at that, really you're trying to get to the economies of scale to be able to do it efficiently, right? So you look at a lot of the large providers, tier ones, they have the capabilities to do so. Where we got to figure out the way to create that economies of scale and make it efficient for others is how do you provide an ecosystem where the tier two, tier threes can participate and participate where they need to, because you're looking at a much different implementation. They may not have the big engineering teams that the big companies have. They don't have the scale, right? That economies of scale to get things cost effective. So how can you enable them to play in this ecosystem? And there are ways to do it, right? There are ways. Jason and I actually talked about this a little bit before as well. There are ways to accomplish this, and not only from, call it the hardware perspective, the software platform perspective, but you're looking at the application management perspective as well, right? So when you're looking at an LCM implementation of applications, how do you do that and make it feasible and scalable for smaller operators to be able to do it and get the same type of benefits the large operators are getting out of that, right? So there's definitely ways to do that. It's just you kind of have to have, I guess, call it an ecosystem of participants that are willing to go down that path and do it. And even with, call it, different requirements that different operators have, there's still a way to do it, right? There's still a way to implement
and it's like you said before, Paul. It's like there's certain stuff that it should just be pretty much straightforward and standardized, right, and not different. And what is kind of cool, without going too far down the road, which we will talk about the difference between standards and open source and how things have worked together in the past and now, and who's doing what at what time. The nice thing about having, because we always say that there's like there's three pillars of good tech, right? It's open source, standards, and testing, right? When you have those three, then it's gonna be good. The nice thing that the open source community is doing now in this industry, because of funded projects like RDK and Purple, is you're now getting, it's like the thing is, writing standards is like knowing that you're going to be playing a game of telephone, right? And so we write it and we're like, oh, certainly this is clear enough, right? But that doesn't come out until the implementation. But what open source is basically a standardized set of, it's like a standardized set of implementers, right? So they're making, the mistakes they're making are being made in one place out in the open. We get to clarify everything one time. And then that gets built into the things that are being reused by the operators, and they don't have to worry about the fact that it's going to be different every time. Now, there's some things like more advanced applications where it is going to be different every time because the literal solution is different. But for stuff that really should be hardened by now, right? Like that's basically what's done. And the nice thing about, we're talking about containerization and sort of compartmentalizing and componentizing a lot of things. That includes all of these very, very basic router functions, right? And getting to the point where they are containerized enough that if you do have to update something, even if it is something, very rudimentary like DHCP, that update's not going to require you to book an entire firmware over 18 months. Not like.
Right. The great thing about open source, a lot of the open source going on now, it is heavily based on standards, right? So to start that open source implementation based off standards, you're getting a very good head start. And it goes into what Jason was saying very quickly, where, okay, now it's, let's sharpen up the edges and make it even better, right? With practical implementations and find those soft spots we need to harden with further requirements or, further testing or whatever it may be.
And I imagine as well that must, that if you're doing it in a way which is modular, that must also, if things go wrong, actually what you're unpicking there and needing to roll back and then subsequently change, I guess it must make a big difference there as well, right? It's not just in you can roll out small changes, but if it goes wrong, you can quickly pull that back without probably the cost and overhead that you would have had in a monolithic build where you're pushing that out to, you know, to loads of devices. So I imagine from that perspective, there must be a hell of a lot of synergies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, I'm sure you have good insight into this, but when you're looking at operators across the board, the requirements are very, very the same. I would argue probably 90% of all the requirements are same, maybe even 95. It's that 5% deviation that you're looking at, right? So it's not like from operator to operator, you have these huge requirement differences. You have requirement differences, but it should be manageable requirement differences. And now the good thing with something like an LCM, I'm sure we've all experienced the embedded applications in these devices back in the day, which was no fun, right? Very complicated, very hard, very taxing on the devices. That gives it another layer of simplicity going to LCM because you can easily take applications and put them in and take them out and easily assign applications to, different CPE, independently and not relying on embedded applications where you're embedding it, you go through all that, you're done, you can't change it, right? So that gives you that adaptive ecosystem to adapt as your business adapts a lot quicker.
Okay. So maybe it's worth breaking down a little bit the life cycle that we see. Maybe we can cover parts of this specifically in different pieces. So I guess what we're talking about there is a little bit on the side of where you have deployed devices and you're making changes and things like that. Is there anything earlier in that process when you're developing a product, when you've got, before the point that product is deployed, when you're doing certain things and, are there things here that benefit from that same modularity during that process? I guess I'm thinking things like the ability to be able to run things like A/B testing, for example, and other things that allow you to use that modularity during the product development as well as when the devices are deployed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because what's happening, it's, I don't want to say that it's a cultural shift, right? There's a running gag that the end result of anyone who is in hardware is that they're going to be in software, right? Right. And so, because ultimately you want to get to the point where that is the thing that you're able to change, and that has happened in this industry. And so it is now at the point where the design philosophy around broadband gateways and Wi-Fi devices is more software focused. It is more agile, right? So this allows you to use those concepts, agile concepts, CI/CD, all this stuff in the development of things that in the past were exclusively the realm of embedded software developers and really low level hardware and firmware developers, and that's what they learned how to do, and that's how things had worked for so long. That again, the evolution has to happen. But now all of those concepts, regression testing and redundancy, and making sure that you have stuff get out the door quick and that you can fail fast and all that, now gets to be in the realm that it was never in before.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're looking at it, if it's all compartmentalized, right? So when you're making a change to one compartment, one module of the whole ecosystem, there should be a certain sense of, call it security, that everything else didn't get touched because it's within that compartment. So from a development perspective, you can focus on optimizing piece by piece. And when you go back and you have to update one module, that theoretically it shouldn't, affect the other modules and allow you to keep going forward, right?
Right.
You
And if
always
it
you gotta make
does, you
yeah,
can find out way faster.
yeah, exactly, right? So that should help from a development perspective and a time to market perspective, right? And a test resource. If you can go through, do this, and have high confidence in each one, and they truly are compartmentalized, it'll allow you to keep moving forward even when you have a problem. So you can skip it, work on it, and start working on the next one, and keep on moving, right?
And I guess that makes a big difference as well in terms of you were saying before the yeah, so the speed at which you can roll them out, but I guess also the speed at which you can test those as individual components. So, for example, you don't need to build the full image to be able to test that component. You can take that component, and because of the you've got the commonality of the 90% of stuff that's there, you can build harnesses, you can build things around that that allow you to exercise it as if it were within the monolith build that you would have had before. But actually you can know what the, as you said, Jason, that happens much quicker because you can see the inputs and outputs of that individual component. You can see what's going on there and its impact on the wider ecosystem once it's deployed in that way.
Yeah, it allows you to verify functions in a stepped approach, right? And then at the end, you'll do a holistic, test to make sure, stability, survivability, do that soaking, all that is working end to end. But it's good that you can look at it and say, okay, great, I have this function, I got these 8 functions in there. I can test the HTTP, NTP, whatever. It's all working as expected. Great, I'm done with that one. Now I can move on to the next one, right? And you can even do it as they're developing each, right?
So we get beyond that. Then you've kind of developed the new functions, let's say new components, and you're at the point where you're ready to deploy. At that stage, then where do you see similar question, I guess? Where do you see the big benefits of this kind of modular approach in managing that transition to when you start to deploy this to real devices and when you start to put this in front of real users?
Or you can fail fast, right? It's like you can start doing this stuff way sooner than you could have before, and you completely throw the idea of kitchen sink design out the window. It's you're able to be like, okay, we can do this, or we can try this out, and if we need to update it, updating it's not going to be a problem. If we need to fix something's not going to be a problem. It really is all of the benefits that a pure software world gets to realize or has been able to do forever, that now operators can do with their devices.
And I guess that there are things like being able to see and segment groups of devices as well, right? So even just the rollout of that, and yeah, I guess talking about fail fast, but then it's also when you're widening that out, I guess you can have more or better staggered rollouts of software, and similarly be able to pull that back if something's not going according to plan.
Yeah, yeah. We're seeing that a lot like even with the transition from Tier 69 to USP, it's like because of the way things work now and because of all the open source work that's being done, um, the ability to do that in like a hybrid way, or even we're only going to do it for this stuff for this fleet first, or for these products first, or for this use case first, and leave everything else alone, or maybe we want to do both the same stuff at the same time. Like um, this entire ecosystem now supports that, right?
And what about then because the other maybe the elephant in the room here is that you move to a point in time where you're aligned to the standard. You might move to an open source software, be it RDK, be it Purple, OpenWRT, and then you start to roll that out to the new devices you put out in the field, and you're left holding the baby that is legacy. Is there something here around the support of those legacy devices and things like that in your experience that is helped here by this, the kind of direction of travel that we're seeing? Or are they just kind of left to wither on the vine until that day comes when they've all been replaced?
Uh, You probably, yes, more the latter. Because some of these devices have a lifespan, right? And you're going to get an end of life with the vendors, with the chipset manufacturers, So you're going to go down that path. You'll take a step back and evaluate which ones make sense to change. And if you can affect that change to give them a longer lifespan, because everything's about expense, right? You'll do that. But then there's going to be a class of devices where you're looking at going, we really need to get these out of the network. Let's focus that. Let's use the new device to get the old devices out. So there'll definitely be a mix of all of it. You really need, and if you look at the number of devices a lot of service providers have, the list is quite long in their network. So you definitely need to take a step back, take all those devices, make a couple pools out of them. This is the ones we can update and prolong their life. The hardware will work. These are the ones that we're just going to let ride for a little while longer. And then you have that pool of these are the ones that really need to come out. We really need to start, forcing that transition now before something happens to those devices.
And is there any almost like within that transition period, because there's a point of we've got these devices in the field, and I guess there's still an expectation from user perspective that they get, newest services and things like that. Is there, as part of that transition, anywhere where we're helped by this kind of like modularity approach in terms of we know we have to maintain them for a period of time, but in things like harmonization, right, in terms of getting a common experience across those devices from an end user perspective, or in the way it communicates with the back end and things like that, or is it truly you kind of almost need to have that cut off? I'm curious here as to, is there still a way that an operator can get to a place where they say, I've got a mixed estate of devices in the field, but actually what I can do is there's a certain level in the stack where it becomes common, and then everything above that I can deliver as part of my service and still give a good service to those users that even though they're still on the old hardware, but they get the benefit of some of the new, software and that modular approach.
Yeah, especially if you can implement some type of LCM ecosystem to be able to manage applications, that'll definitely help, especially from a customer experience perspective, right? So there's two parts to that equation. There's the customer experience part of it, which they're basically call it customer facing applications that they expect new features, enhanced functionality. But to your other point of the equation, the support side, I call it service provider based focused applications, where it enables you to support those devices much more efficiently and find issues quicker to be able to resolve the customer's issues instead of, kind of wait and letting them go around and around to the operational support cycle and then finally be a churn, right? So if you can solve both of those with your existing hardware and software, great. But if you can't, it's probably a good lever to use to start getting people to get off of those older devices and onto new. And the hardest part about that whole equation is the folks that won't let you change it, right? The folks that will let you change it, not a problem. But we in the past, my past experience, we ran into a pretty good subset of folks that had call it a router 10 years old, and they would not let you change it out because they had one very simple argument. It just works. Don't touch it, right? So those are the ones that become complicated of how do you get them off it and help them move forward, because there's multiple reasons you're getting it off, whether it's, a customer experience focused reason or a security based reason or network architecture change reasons where there's new technology that's got to come out anyways. So sometimes that's actually the hardest part is getting that customer to agree to change. Although it's better for them, just that it works.
And that's been another evolution, I think, just in terms of the way that the industry works and the cultural attitude towards it. Because we always say, like on Epic Melon, we always talk about on multiple occasions, we talked about the fact that like broadband technology, it was a consumer technology first, right? It was they the telcos, right? And until packet cable came out and until the cable companies started offering broadband in the way that we think of it today, like there was no interaction whatsoever between the end user and the ISP for the internet. They just made a phone call, right? And so because it was consumer first, that attitude has been sticky for a long time. The same thing with Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi was consumer first. Um, and so that attitude has been sticky for a long time. It's come up to the point where that is how people have experienced it up until now. But I feel like the evolution, just in the same way that operators have been taking over control of the design of the CPE, I they're also taking control of the fact that it is their product, right? And there is so much more that can be done when the box you get is the one from the operator, and they're the ones who are keeping it up to date.
Yep.
Like, right? And there might be a point where that needs to be conveyed, but I hope it gets to a point where it's never even a question. Like people just drop that attitude.
Right.
And I say that as a person who never expected to be somebody who would defend that attitude, by the way.
But no, there is that evolution, right? And when you look at this, it's not that it's bad going and buying a router from the big box store, but you're not going to get the same warranties. You're not going to get the opportunity of a tech to come out and fix your problem if they can't get it that you get with an operator, right? So the tech support functionality, and operators a lot of the times don't do a great job of explaining this to customers, where the customers have all these benefits if they get the device, the router from the operator, is allowed to basically run their customer experience and optimize it and make sure it is good. They're also going to be on the hook to make sure everything works for them as well. Because you know how it is. You get a year warranty, buy something out of the store, and it's like, thank you very much, go buy a new one, right? Or it doesn't work, oh, well, call your operator anyways, right?
Yeah.
So you might just start with the operator, get the devices that were optimized for that access network by that operator. You're much more apt to get a better customer experience.
And that's where this whole the consumer attitude, the consumer first attitude has played into this, is because even though Wi-Fi was a consumer product, it doesn't matter because it's they as far as anybody is concerned, it's the internet. And so operators have been and are being blamed for this anyway.
Right.
Right. And so that's why you see this move to taking ownership of that as a product and being you're going to get the best Wi-Fi from this operator. And that's the thing that we're advertising, because that before they would have a terrible experience and then blame the operator for it anyway because they think the internet's not working, right? And then
Right.
when you slap on hundreds of connected devices in your home on top of that, things
Yep.
that are designed by people who have never dealt with networking before in their lives and were just doing what Paul said, where it was consumer electronics products where you buy a piece of plastic and it lasts a year and then they don't support it anymore. That's not a thing that people did, right?
Right. But I mean,
And
and
now all
some
of a
of it,
sudden you have to have LCM for all of it, right?
Yeah.
yeah. And some of it, it's the operators doing themselves in the past. Some of them that were going down the path of, well, we're just going to be a dumb pipe. We don't care about the customer experience. It's like, well, why would you look at it that way? You have, as an operator, great opportunity in front of you to own that home and to own how a lot of those services work and be the forefront of it. And then branch off into that, right? That's where an LCM, again, from the customer experience perspective, is great. You can branch off to that with a lot of different applications and things you can do to optimize services application, things they're doing in the home. So it's good, like Jason said, it's good to see a very strong shift away from that sentiment of it's just a dumb pipe to going, we're going to own the home and we're going to give our customers a very smart, customer centric focused experience that they can grow on and grow into, and we can give them what they need, no matter if it's call it some type of Wi-Fi management. That's kind of table stakes these days. To me, that's an operational thing you need to do anyways, because they're going to call you if it doesn't work. But security things, and you can start getting into, depending on what the customer's doing, optimizing their internet service for what they're using, whether it's working from home, gaming, or whatever. There's things you can definitely get into and make the experience even better if you're managing all of the whole ecosystem and have that flexibility of some type of LCM and applications to write onto.
And it turns out it's working. People do like it. And the operators who are doing this get great results.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
You got to, get it to the point where, I know it's hard, but people love their operator, right? I think it can be done.
That's what
It's,
I'm saying. I never thought I'd be that guy.
yeah, yeah, you know what? I'm over here. I never thought you'd be that guy either, Jason. So I'm very impressed. I've gotten a few earfuls from him. So I get it. I know where he's coming from.
And it makes sense, that kind of the fact that they're owning that relationship more. If you think of, as you say, that shift from it being a consumer product first, you think of where like the TV industry is broadly similar, right? If you can go and buy a TV from your local electronics store, and that's great, it will work and it will do its thing. But if it breaks or if there's something that goes wrong with it, it's pretty difficult to get that fixed. And so the experience around that as a user is not great. But you can then go and buy TV service from your operator. There's an ongoing relationship there. You can knock on the door if something goes wrong, and it's completely logical that broadband operators and ISPs would be putting their hands around this and saying, no, stay with us. We can deliver not just the connectivity, and I think it's an important time as well, because an important shift has been made, and we talk about this quite a lot, in that the connectivity now, and Jason, we talked about this when on your podcast, the connectivity now is really just a commodity. Like, you expect to be connected, you expect for that to be uninterrupted connection at all times wherever you
And you
are.
don't need as much as that bandwidth number isn't a competitive number anymore. Like, I
Exactly.
know it's still going to be for a while because marketing departments are like, oh, bigger number is bigger than smaller number. We can use that, but it's just not. Like, it's not the thing they can compete on anymore, And so you either have two directions. You can either be defeated by that and resign yourself to the fact that you are a dumb pipe, um, and then just try to make the network as efficient as possible and get as many government kickbacks as you possibly can, or you try to lean into it and go in the positively into the other direction. And the buzzword that I kept hearing, I think Paul was it. I feel like it was last year or 2 years ago, where it was like the evolution from. And I hate this term, but I'm going to say it anyway. From a telco to a techco, but really
Uh,
what it is instead of being a internet service provider, they are a technology service provider, a managed technology service provider,
yep.
which which you should have been the whole time,
which you should have
right?
been the whole time.
Yeah, but it sounds great that you're going there, even though you weren't doing so. Yeah, I'm with you. But to your point, John, what really drives the customer's perception of their service provider is not when things work; it's when things don't work. Anyone can make them work, but when they don't work, if you talk to any customer, that if they like their service provider or despise them, it's because of a circumstance of it not working and how they handled it, right? So that's where within this whole ecosystem, those operational implementations and efficiencies are highly, highly important. It's great you give them value added services. You need to, you should. That makes you part of, what was it, the tech co
Yep.
now? But a lot of people focus on that and lose sight of the basic fundamental of, you need to make it work. And when it doesn't, you need to be the expert to fix it as soon as possible. The customer shouldn't be calling in more than once. I would say the customer shouldn't probably be having to call in once with all the data we have, with all the data we're
Right,
able
right.
to get via these great folks that create stuff like TR69 and TR369. You're welcome, Jason.
Those
Um,
guys.
yeah, those guys, you have so much data at your fingerprints. There's so much proactive actions you can implement from it. It's just, do you choose to do it or not? And a lot of people don't choose to do it because it's work, right? It's work to do it. There's a lot of times they get all the data and they're like, oh, look at us. Great. We got all this data. We're done. Thank you. Have a great day. Well, what are you doing with that data, right? The data is only good as what you use it for. But you should know, I would say 90+% of the time when something's wrong with a customer, then you should be proactively going out and fixing it. No matter if it's something that's going in the house, you call them and say, hey, you need another access point. I see device X. Every night at 5 o'clock is going into a very bad state of connection. That's telling me you're probably walking in a certain location of the house with it. Let's go and let's contact them and fix that. Or if it's something in the access network, you should be able to see it. Let's queue those things up on trucks. Trucks are out there every day, right? Guarantee they're going to be going through by that crossbox in the next day or two. Put it on that text list and make them go out there and figure out what's going on to make sure it gets taken care of, right? So you definitely need to be more proactive for customers today than you ever were. In the past, and I've heard a lot of excuses in the past, well, why would we want to do that? It costs money, right? It's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do it? Acquisition cost is very high, right? So So you got to look at it and optimize what you have, because there's a lot of things service providers have. It's just, are they using them to their true potential?
And I guess we're getting to a period. Oh, well, we're in a period. I shouldn't say we're getting to a period. We are in a period now where there are tools that make that kind of diagnostic work much, much easier, right? So, apply, like you said before, you've got all this data. People haven't really done anything with it. They've kind of had it, and it's great to have it there. But now, actually, that there's this whole new fancy tool. I don't know if you've heard of it, artificial intelligence, that can crunch large amounts of data and turn it into something meaningful and useful. So, are we seeing a shift, from that perspective of, because it's easy to quantify, right, for the user focused applications and the user focused services of saying, if I deliver them a smart home application or service, I can increase the ARPU by $1 or a few dollars or whatever that is. It's quite tangible and it's a bit easier to see that, but maybe the support costs are a little bit more difficult to quantify. The benefits of, as you say, Paul, doing that proactive piece of work to say, how do we make sure that the user has everything they need before they even pick up the phone? And that's been diagnosed, because the support cost of doing that, the additional cost that you would have carry as an operator, is it because there it's been more difficult to quantify, or is there some other reason that hasn't really happened before now, or is it just the work?
Well, I think it's Paul talked about it before. It's like there's this weird catch-22 of, you know, or between proactively taking care of stuff and being too invisible, that customers only complain about the negative side of things, but also the general attitude of just wanting to be that dumb pipe or not, right? And one of the cool things that this kind of data and technology, including with AI, can do is not just make sure that there's no problems, but work it directly into the customer success side of things and communicating that value to them, right? Because you can be like the best message I could ever get, right? Well, I'll give you an example from our power company, right? They're very good at customer communication. So if something happens and they brought it back on and we didn't know, they tell us, right? Right. So if you see that, we're experiencing some outages in these areas, blah, 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 we're working on it. And, here's a timeline of when it's going to be fixed. And, you know, it, and I say, oh, that's weird. I didn't even experience any downtime, but I know something happened and it was all fixed. Then, man, that's awesome. I want to keep paying you.
Yeah, yep. I call that the customer feedback loop when we were looking at all this and how we were going to implement some things. Because no matter what you do and how good it is, if they don't know, does it really matter? Security is a great example, right? So you do all these great things in security, you're protecting them in the background. What do you think the customer's thought is? I've never seen a thing out of this thing. Why am I paying $10 a month for it, right? You need to have that loop going, hey, we've protected X, Y, and Z. This tried to, go in and, infiltrate you this week. We protected you. We're on it. We'll give you updates as we're taking care of you in the background. Or even, look at Wi-Fi. There's no reason you can't look at it and go, we identify and proactively reach out to the customer. We see that one of your devices is having a hard time, at X time each day. We want to proactively work with you and fix it. You can either A, choose we'll send you an AP, or B, please feel free to call us and we'll walk through it. We know what it is. It won't be troubleshooting. It'll be a solution session where we'll talk through it. And if we need to send you something, we'll send it. And then we'll also give you the option of give them the option of sending it and walking through it with them. Or when a tech's rolling by your house, we'll have them stop in quick, install it in 10 minutes and walk out, right? Make sure you're good to go. There's no reason you can't do all that, but again, cost is always a function of all this. Do it in an optimized way where you're efficiently using your resources. Like I said, when a tech's going by anyways, there's all scheduling stuff in there. You can bounce
Right.
that off schedules, implement all the AI, you throw an AI thing out there with that, right? There's a lot of data you can use there to make sure that you're optimizing your operational costs and taking care of the customer at the same time.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, Paul, because I think there's a big part of this, and it comes up a lot in the conversation. Certainly, I have when it comes to these open source platforms and the benefits of them, and because you see a lot of the big names that are associated with certain open source platforms, and we know who they all are. But you did talk about earlier you need to get those economies of scale. You need to make this more appealing to the tiers twos and the threes, and in the UK, and I know in the US you've got these new kids on the block that are the kind of fiber overbuilders, and building an internet service on top of that, and so they are currently in that position of competing on. I mean, it's a land grab to start with, but really it's just on get the highest speed at the lowest possible price. They're still kind of in that frame of mind at the moment, and as you work up to the tier ones, obviously there's that transition more towards providing more value. It's not just about the speed anymore. Tier twos and threes are kind of in the middle of this. They're in this like weird place where they're not quite making the big investments in open source and not quite just trying to differentiate on speed, but they're like the forgotten middle child almost in all of this. What needs to change to help that group in the middle really kind of embrace this kind of open source and this getting on board with the tier ones and driving that forward?
Well, you
Well,
want to throw
I think,
softball questions at Paul. I mean,
yeah, I think the group comment was the key in all this. So what you see a lot is you see a lot of tier twos and tier threes gravitating to call it the end-to-end implementers, right? Although you're locked in, they're giving you everything because either you don't have the economy of scale, you don't have the engineering resources to be able to develop, architect, test, and implement, right? Which is fine. Some of them do that, but you are still seeing on the other side of the equation, and you do lose some of your customer experience there. You do see on the other side of the equation where you're seeing some more tier twos and threes standing up going, I want to change this. I want to own my customer experience. I want to go down the road where I'm owning what I'm deploying. How do I do this? And there's a way to do that, right? I think, again, the group thing is the key. What did we talk about earlier? Guarantee 95% of the requirements are exactly the same, right? Yes, there will be, I wouldn't say a heavy lift, but a good amount of changes within, call it a config file, but a lot of the other stuff will be the same. And there's no reason you can't standardize requirements on underneath the hood anyways to do it. So there's ways to do this from a hardware perspective and a software perspective. Even on the hardware, I guarantee 95% of what they're doing is the same, right? I bet you if you really looked under the hood and what the big difference is, probably the argument will be about cost. Right. I'm willing to give a better customer experience to pay for this. Sorry, I can't. It doesn't fit in my cost model. I can't, right? That's really what you're grappling with at the end of the day, especially from a tier 2, 3 perspective. Again, get it. It's very valid. You got to look at that. But there are ways to get over this hump and call it a different approach to your network and your architectures and implementations, especially from an in-home services perspective, that you can make cost effective and you can create that economies of scale. So there are ways to do it and do it with limited engineering resources because it'll be verified across the board. So there's definitely ways to do this.
we do that standardization work too. So like that stuff is out there, at least from the Broadband Forum's perspective. It's like that's something that otherwise TR-124 has been out for forever. And it's probably a marketing failure on their part if it's not used more often. But that's exactly the kind of thing. It's like 95% of it is going to be the same. So make it so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to, right? Because if you really look at what you're doing, when you change, you're really changing because some of the feeding technology changed, right? Whether it's something in the WAN interface or big one is wireless, right? Whether it's, new wireless standards coming out and everyone wants to go to the newer standards and, upgrade the wireless interfaces. A lot of the stuff under the hood is very, very similar to what we were doing 15 years ago.
And I guess the maths doesn't change. I guess it's the 80-20 rule almost, right? I know we talked about 90-10 and the underlying point is most of it is common. There's a bit that it needs to be different, but actually you will always need that, whatever that small percentage is, to be different because that surely that's how the operators are differentiating as well, right? That's their secret sauce that sits on top of the
Right.
common part of that.
And that's great, right? Yeah, and the containerization and sort of disaggregation of how these devices are built helps that like immensely because they can just focus on that part.
And even on that part, the secret sauce part, I guarantee you'll go into an ecosystem and 98% of it can be LCM based, right? So, so I mean, you really now it becomes an exercise of control and applications within the devices, right? And obviously, like I talked about, config files will always be the different, right? You're going to have a different ACS. You're going to have different, call it Wi-Fi, standard Wi-Fi implementations, SSIDs, passwords, whatever security tells you, different password ecosystems based on corporate security and their requirements. All that kind of stuff is manageable, right? But within the device itself, it's going to be very, very, very similar. And that LCM can take care of a lot of that special sauce.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. So, what does let's put our future hats on for a second, and 5 or 10 years from now, we we will certainly be in a different place than we are today. We've seen in the last 5 or 10 years things have moved on considerably. What do you expect to see? Or what would you like to see? Maybe is the question. I'll start with you, Jason. On what do you think 5 or 10 years from now that ecosystem looks like, from how operators are kind of managing their estates when it comes to these kind of things?
Honestly, I've said this a lot because I really like that question because I'm very passionate about this, and I think that consumer first, that clash between the way that broadband has been delivered and the consumer first technology that is responsible for making it work finally becomes unified and allowing the and again, we don't have a good name for this. There was one operator that came up with a pretty good name for this, but I'm not going to say what it was because they might want to use that brand in the future. But the home gateway, for lack of a better term, that's what it is now. But this is not what the thing of the future will be. For me, I really want to see it become an appliance that the consumer is very aware of and values like they value their refrigerator, right? Like this box is the thing that is responsible for their connected experience entirely, and it is something that they not interact with. Like they don't necessarily. I don't want to say that they have to do more work, but it's something that they are aware of is responsible for their connected experience at all levels, right? And they're like, oh, this is cool. This thing is neat. This thing is what makes it so my gaming works awesome. This is the thing that unifies my smart home because now it's got Matter on it or whatever, right? And it's one box because that is the location that is responsible for all communication. And it knows everything about all communication that's going on. And so it is the best place for most of this stuff to get done. And they're getting cheaper and more powerful. So once you start working edge compute for AI into that, and the things that for those use cases that really, really, really should be done at that level and not sent up to the cloud, then that's what I hope will happen in the next 5-10 years.
And is that the thing that finally encourages people to take their router out of the cupboard and stop killing the Wi-Fi?
Paul and I talked about this last time. It's like when that happens,
Yeah.
people will stop putting it in stupid places.
I like the simplicity of that. In all that what the future looks like is there's this one fundamental problem gets solved in terms of like just stop putting it in a terrible place and maybe you'll have a better connection. Like maybe we can fix that in 5 to 10 years. Paul, any other thoughts you'd add to that for Jason, or any additional comments?
Yeah. What a couple things I'd like to see. I'm going to use a very popular open source term, Jason, you're going to love. I'd like to stop so much forking in requirements. Requirements are very similar. Everyone doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. And I get a lot of people want to do it because, you got to have that, flashy buzzword bingo sort of approach to things. But under the hood of all of that, you're all not that different. Everyone's very, very similar. Again, obviously, there's different WAN implementations, right? That's okay. That's one part of the equation. But the other parts, call it, the inside part of that equation, everyone's very, very similar. There's a way to make better operational efficiencies and better economies of scale, not only for service provider segments, but across the industry. And obviously, the key to that is the great things Jason and the teams are doing at the Broadband Forum and others, and Purple Foundation, RDK, all of them. But from a service provider perspective, there's no reason that that can't be more efficient in that area. So we're not just spending all these cycles doing things over and over again, or doing the same things 100 times because we just, aren't willing to work together.
The future looks bright. I like that, and I think one of the things that I know I have this conversation very, very regularly, and the term that I've kind of landed on, I think best explains it, and it's not my term. This is a term that I've heard from others. It is talking about enablement versus differentiation. Like, the enablement is the thing that everybody needs, exactly as you said, Paul. Most people in that ecosystem have the same level of enablement that's required to build a service upon. But now that the priority is shifting to the differentiate, you can, with that, you go, okay, I can spend maybe 20% of my budget on the enablement because I know I need to spend a lot of money on that anyway. But then actually 80% of my budget can be closer to where I can add value to the end user and differentiate. And that's where you want to spend the money. So my hope is that I think that kind of conversation about, well, where do you want to spend the money? Do you want to spend the money on doing your the same thing again for your next generation of router when it comes along, redoing the same things you've done before because it didn't work right? Or do you want to really put that effort into and the budget into where you can differentiate your service offering to the user?
I'm just going to say I've never seen a differentiation statistic that made sense to go and look at. We're doing this, and we're differentiated. What you really want to differentiate yourself, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Be very operationally efficient. Take care of the customer, because that is the one main thing customers talk about when they say they love or hate their service provider. It's because of that contact with the service provider when something wasn't working. They blow them away and go above and beyond and fix what they need. There's your differentiation, right? Everyone's doing value-added services. Everyone's doing Wi-Fi management, security, everything, all that kind of fun stuff, right? There's been a million differentiation things that just went nowhere. It's IoT, this, and that, and all that. Great, right? I would say, like I said, the second part actually I'd put in there too is what we talked about earlier, is that feedback loop. Are you telling your customer what you're doing for them? Because you could be doing a million great things. If they don't know, you're doing 0 great things for them. So it's that customer feedback and that operational part of it. What did you do when they called and had a problem? Or did you proactively find their problem and call them? Because that's when people are really blown away. They're like, I thought my service provider just wanted my money and didn't want to do anything else. They literally called me to fix my issue. Isn't that crazy? Right? Those are the differentiations you really want and to focus on. All the other stuff is the value-added features everyone's trying to do.
I like that, Paul. That I think that's a really nice place to wrap things up. So that's been a great conversation, Paul, Jason. Thank you for joining me today. It's been insightful for me. Hopefully it's been useful for you guys. But for there, we'll wrap up and see you on the next episode.
All right. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen.